Hi everyone, I'm Tock Custom, and on this video we're going to show you how to make your very own short sleeve t-shirt from scratch. So in our last video we showed you how to use a store-bought pattern to make your own pattern at home, so if you don't have a pattern you might want to watch that. For the project we're going to be using the Brother SE700. Brother is sponsoring this video and this series, so big thanks to Brother for being part of this. And now we're going to talk about all the fabrics and tools and materials that we need to create a shirt from scratch. Now first and most importantly, we need to talk about some fabrics. So obviously we're making a t-shirt. The pattern calls for a knit or a stretchy fabric. Your best choice is a jersey knit fabric, something like this. This is a two-way stretch, which means it stretches side to side, but not so much up and down. This is a four-way stretch. I don't recommend this because it can deform because it's just too stretchy. This is a sweater knit that I'm already making a shirt out of because I thought it would be funny. And then this is a double stitch or like a waffle knit stitch type of shirt. So this is what we're going to use to make our t-shirt today. For tools and materials, this is all really simple. We've got our fabric and our sewing pattern. If you don't have a pattern, definitely check out our last video. Then we've got sewing pins. We're going to be using a neutral white thread for all of our sewing. These are pattern weights which help hold down your pattern to your fabric when you're cutting. I prefer a rotary cutter and a cutting mat for cutting. Otherwise, definitely use a chalk wheel and scissors. And then I've got an iron here, which you will need to press some seams. This is everything that you should need for your project. All right, now here's the pattern we made in our last tutorial. So if you use the same easy pattern material, the first thing I'd recommend doing is ironing it, because as you can see, this is nice and wrinkled. When you iron it, it looks brand new, like you just made it. Okay, so now that our pattern is nice and flat, I'm just going to set it aside and we're going to prepare our fabrics. All right, so I laid out my gray knit fabric. I pre-washed this. Please make sure you pre-wash your fabric, otherwise they can shrink in the wash and then they won't fit and then you'll be really sad. So in the last video, we talked about patterns that you cut out on the fold line. So that symbol on the bottom means that we would cut this out on the fold line like this, but if I did that, I'd be wasting all this other fabric here. So I wanted to show you a trick to help hopefully save fabric. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up because it's folded in half, and I'm going to bring one of the edges of the fabric over to this edge of the table here. So I've got the fabric folded open and I've got one of my edges right here. So what I want to do is I want to fold this just enough to where it's going to fit our front panel piece. So I'm going to take my front panel number one, I'm going to lay it down here, and then just flatten out the fabric as best I can and make sure it's nice and straight. All right, so fabric is folded in half and I'm laying my pattern with the fold line symbol right on that edge. Now I'm going to put down some pattern weights so this thing doesn't move around, and then I'm just going to cut this out with a rotary blade. Now without moving the pattern, I'm going to try to kind of move all the cut fabric away from it. And before I even move this, I want to point out some of our symbols here. So this little triangle at the top is a notch. I'm going to just do a little snip right through the center of that. And any other notches, like right here in the shoulder, I'm going to do a snip, and then I'm going to do a snip on the side seam. So that's it for symbols on this particular pattern. I'm going to pick this up and keep the pattern with the fabric and set it aside so it doesn't get mixed up. Thankfully, we saved enough fabric where I can cut out my sleeves here. So we're going to cut out our first sleeve. And now to cut out our other sleeve, we have to flip the pattern upside down because we need a mirror copy of it. Now I'm going to lay these two panels of fabric on top of each other. So I'm putting our pattern back over the two pieces of fabric we just cut so I can transfer my notches. Anyway, we've got our sleeves cut out. Now thankfully there was a big enough piece of scrap where I can lay our neckband pattern down, or pattern number 4, and the grain line is actually going the correct way so that it's going to stretch the correct way. So using a ruler, I'm just going to cut out some straight lines. Now, just like with the front panel, I'm going to fold this over just as much as I need to. Make sure it's nice and smooth, and then line up the fold edge symbol there with the folded edge of our fabric, just like we did before. All right, so I'm done with all of our fabric, and again, I'm going to transfer my symbols before I even pick this up. So we have all our fabric cut out, which is great. Again, I do like to keep the pattern with each cut because some patterns have like 20 different pattern pieces, so that's helpful. Something I should have mentioned while I was cutting the fabric that's very important is this grain line symbol. So the grain line arrow goes along the grain line of the fabric. Why that's important with knit fabrics is your fabric stretches side to side, kind of perpendicular to the grain line, where it shouldn't stretch quite as much up and down. And that's really important with things like sleeves and your body, because you want this to stretch around your arm instead of be really tight. So make sure you're paying attention to your grain lines. And with fabric that has a print or an image on it, it's always easy to tell because the grain line always points up so that your graphic is right side up. Now, officially, this is still a how to make a t-shirt tutorial for sure, but the last video we did was how to read and make a pattern. So we're gonna kind of do both right now. So I'm gonna grab the instructions from our pattern, and this is where we left off in our last video. So it says sewing directions, and we're doing top B. So this is step 1, and we're gonna kind of follow along, except I'm gonna speed through it because a lot of these illustrations are crazy. Now here's step 1, and in a nutshell, it's just saying to sew the front and back panels together at the shoulder seams. Some of these illustrations show you what it looks like after you've already done it, which can be confusing, so we're just going to show you how this works. Now what it's saying to do is to open up panel 1 and lay it down right side up. This definitely looks like the back of a piece of knit fabric, so this is clearly our right side, so make sure that you've got your right side facing up. And then we're going to take our number 2 panel, or the back of our shirt, and we're going to just line up the shoulder seams here. Now starting at kind of the inside, I'm going to pin these together. So I'm going to pin the inside, and then the outside, and then I'll just do a pin in the middle. Now we're ready to do our first 2 stitches on the sewing machine. Alright, so we're at our machine, and it's really important that for every single stitch we use a stretch stitch. So something like a zigzag or the triple stitch are stretch stitches, but I prefer this lightning bolt stitch. Now our pattern calls for a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on all of our seams. So I'm going to start my stitch about 1/2 inch onto the fabric. So I'm going to start my stitch, and as an intro to knits, I just want to make sure I'm letting the machine kind of feed the fabric in by itself if it can. Sometimes if it can't, you have to kind of tug it in the back or maybe the front to keep it flat. But this is kind of a delicate process if you're new to sewing with knits, so just try to get a feel for it with whatever machine you're using. Anyway, I'm just going to let it sew off the fabric, which is fine, and then cut our thread, and now we're going to do our other shoulder. But this is what that stretch stitch does, so our threads will not break if this stretches. Alright, so we have our first 2 shoulder seams done. I'm not going to serge or finish these seams just because I want to focus on the construction, but you should now be able to open this up and find your neck hole, which is great. So we are done with step 1, and now we can look at what is next on our pattern. So for step 2, this is calling for pattern number 4, and we're going to sew this into a ring for our neckband. Now the wording for step 2 can be kind of confusing. So here's what that'll actually look like. This is the right side of my fabric face up. I'm going to fold this and match up these raw edges so they are right sides together. Now I'm going to do my stitch across here real quick. Alright, it might be hard to see the stitches, but I sewed that shut, and now I'm just cutting off a little bit of this excess fabric so it's not bulky. So here's our seam, and now we have a loop of fabric for our neckband. Now what the pattern wants us to do is fold this in half, wrong sides together, so that it's showing the pretty side of the fabric on the outside. Now it's a lot easier to fold this in half if you kind of pin it shut along the way, so I'm going to put some pins as I'm folding this. And as I'm pinning and folding, I want to make sure these 2 raw edges are right on top of each other. Now we have our sewn, folded, and pinned neckband in place, and right at the top is where we did our stitch, and the seam is hidden on the inside of that fold. So now we are going to press this flat. So when I'm pressing fabric, I'm just going to put my iron on the fabric, press it, and then hit it with steam. I'm not going to slide it all around. So I'm just going to keep doing that all the way around. And I also put the pin heads on the inside so that I don't melt any of the plastic pin heads that I've got here. It might not seem like that made a huge difference, but you'll really be able to tell when we put this together and you get nice crisp fold lines like that. So we're done with step 2 and we're on to step 3. And this is another perfect example of how confusing these illustrations can be. So I'm not even going to talk about this. I'm just going to show you what it actually wants you to do. Now we're going to take our front and back panels of our shirt and lay it right side up so that we're looking at the neck hole. So I can tell this is the back panel because we've got our two notches in the back here, and then this is our front panel. Now I'm going to find the seam of our neckband and I'm going to put it right between those notches at the center back. So I'm going to pin through all these layers of fabric, just like that, and lay it flat. Now I'm going to pull the neckband towards me, so it kind of folds in half like that, and then I'm going to pinch it where it comes together, so I know that's the center point of my front. So while I'm pinching this, I'm going to find the center front of our shirt and match up the raw edges there as well. So we have the front and the back pinned to our shirt, and now I'm going to kind of just open this up and try to lay this as flat as I can. I'm going to pin the left side and the right side. Now it's kind of making this like rounded diamond shape, so between each of our pins, I'm going to just keep matching up these raw edges and kind of pulling it tight, match that up, and then I'm going to pin it together, and I'm going to do this all the way around like twice. So I'm just going to kind of speed this up and show you how it looks when it's ready. Alright, so far I've got 8 pins holding this to the shirt, so I'm going to take out my inside pins, just because this is getting a little crowded. Now I'm going to do another round of pinning between each of the ones we just did, which might seem like overkill, but when you're sewing something this round, it really will help when you're at the machine. So we went from whatever this is supposed to be to what this actually is, and this is the correct way to do it. I almost forgot, in our last video when we made this pattern, it told us that this is supposed to be sewn at 3/8 of an inch. So we're gonna sew in a circle around here at 3/8 of an inch, not 5/8 of an inch. Before I show you the stitching, I wanna show you something on the table because it'll be easier to see. When I'm sewing at the machine between pins, I'll kind of pull the fabric tight because it forces these raw edges to line up. But if you ever get like a bulge like that and it folds over and then you sew it down like that, you're gonna get a big pleat that runs down your fabric and it's gonna look really weird. Make sure you pull your fabric tight, especially with knits, and then go on to your next pin, pull it tight, and do that all the way around. Now when I'm doing anything round, like sleeves or something like that, you can take this piece off and put it over to the side, and then we can actually use the arm of this machine to sew around in a big loop. So I'm going to slide our shirt under the presser foot, and our seam of our neckband is right where we're going to start this. And I'm lining this up with our 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And I'm going to put my presser foot down. Now I'm just going to smooth out my fabric so it rolls around the arm as we're sewing. Now I'm going to start my stitch and come up to my first pin. So I'm going to take this pin out, and the reason I'm doing this kind of side angle is because I want you to see how I'm slightly pulling it in the back and slightly pulling it in the front to make sure that it's nice and smooth and I'm not getting any pleats or puckers here. So I'm just going to do this one pin at a time, kind of, again, slightly pull it in the back and slightly pull it in the front until we go all the way around. Alright, so we got all the way around, and I just want to mention, if you pull this too tight when you're sewing, it'll get this ruffled look, and if you don't pull tight enough, you might get pleats. So this takes a little bit of practice. You might have to make a few shirts, but let's see how ours turned out. Now we're all done with that stitch, so now I want to fold this so I'm looking at the outside of our seam here. And I'm looking for anything obvious like a big pucker or a big pleat, and it looks pretty smooth all the way around, which is perfect. Okay, so now I want to look at the inside of our neckband. We're going to iron the inside of our stitch that we just did. So this is what we pressed before, and now we're going to press the new seam. Now I'm kind of pulling the shirt tight as I do this, and you may need to rotate this as you go. What we want to do is press the raw edge kind of outward all the way around. So let's flip this over and see how it looks on the outside. Alright, that looks much better. So this is laying nice and flat, and now we are done with step 4, and we've just got 2 steps left. Now for step 5, we're going to be doing our sleeves. So we're doing view B, which is short sleeves. If you're doing long sleeves, it's all the same steps. Now this can be a little tricky if you've never done sleeves before, but we're just going to show you how this works. To get started on our sleeves, we're just going to lay our shirt down and then turn it sideways. It doesn't really matter which way, so that we're looking at one of these big sleeve openings right here. Alright, now I've got my sleeve panels here that we cut out earlier, and we need to figure out which one is the left and which one is the right sleeve. Now Now it's really easy to tell which sleeve is which. So we're gonna sew 2 panels right sides together, and this is the back panel of my shirt here because of the double notch, and I can tell this is gonna match up with the back panel because I've got a double notch on the sleeve. So anyway, these are right sides together. We're gonna match up that center dot at the top of our sleeve and then our notches. So I always cut out a slit at the top of each sleeve where that dot is, and that's gonna match up with our shoulder seam here on our shirt panels. So I'm gonna lay those together and put a pin through all these layers. So now I've got my single notch here for the front and my single notch here for the front of the sleeve. So I'm gonna match up the notches, put them right on top of each other, and another pin there. Then I'm just gonna follow this all the way into the corner here, match up the corners, and pin that. Now, I'll usually pin the whole front first and then the whole back second. So this here in the corner is actually like where your armpit is gonna be. So I'm gonna pull this fabric tight, find the middle, and put a pin there. And I'm just gonna keep doing that. I'm gonna grab 2 pins, pull it tight, make sure these raw edges are matching up flush with each other, and then pin it right in the center. And I'm just gonna keep finding those center points, lining up the fabric and pinning all the way from front to the back. All right, so our front half is done. Now to do the back, I'm gonna match up our double notches just like this and put a pin here. Then we're just gonna match up the corner and do the whole back half the same way we did the front half. So I'm gonna pin my other sleeve so I can sew these both at the same time. But the reason this is tricky is because you've got a sleeve that curves one way and an opening that curves the other. So forcing these together can feel a little awkward, but if you take it slow, hopefully you end up with some nice looking sleeves. All right, so we have both sleeves pinned, and the reason it's not laying flat is because of that opposite curve thing. So we're gonna sew this at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way across with our stretch stitch from corner to corner. I'm not gonna show the close-up sewing for this, but just like we did before, just do one set of pins at a time, pull it tight, do your stitch, and just keep moving all the way until you get to the other side. All right, so we're done with both of our sleeves, and what I'm looking for here is any puckers or pleats along the outside of our seam. So this sleeve looks excellent, and this one looks perfect too. I don't press my sleeve, so don't worry about that. Now, if you did get a pleat in your sleeve, it would look something like this. I'm just pinning it to emulate what a pleat would look like, and it's super noticeable. So anyway, to correct it, you take a seam ripper and you go to the inside and you find where it's overstitched, and then you just pop an inch or 2 of stitches, pull it tight, and then re-sew it shut, and it should get rid of any kind of ruffles or pinches in your fabric. So just in case you make that mistake, that's how you fix it. All right, so we are now done with step 5. So you should have your back, front, and sleeves all sewn on. This is the inside here. I'm gonna pick this up by the corner of the shoulders and just lay it flat, and it should hopefully start to make the shape of a shirt somehow. Now we're on step 6, which is our last step, and there are 3 parts to this that are all pretty simple. So let's show you how to finish your shirt. Now everything is folded in half right sides together, so it should look kind of like a finished shirt. And I'm gonna just take one side and turn this kind of sideways so that I'm just looking at these raw edges from the bottom through the armpit to the tip of your sleeve. So this part is really easy. We're just gonna match up any notches or seams or corners and just pin them together. So here's a single notch, and here's where our sleeve seams come together. We'll match these up and put a pin here. We're just gonna pin it all the way from bottom to top. So everything is pinned, and now we're just gonna sew from the tip of the sleeve through the armpit to the bottom of our shirt, and then we're gonna do the same thing to the other side. So I haven't stitched up our side seams yet because as I'm looking at this on the table, I think it might be a little too big for me. So I'm gonna do about a 1-inch seam allowance instead of our 5/8, and that will make this a little bit more slim and hopefully fit me better. So now I have stitched up our side seams, which looks great, and because there's so much extra fabric, I want to trim that away. So I'm just going to take a moment to trim these seams so they look like the other ones. So we trimmed our seams, and now this is looking more like it's going to fit me. So now would be a great time to do a fitting test. All right, so I am very happy with this fit test. I'm glad we brought in the sides. I think it's a little bit slimmer, which looks good. So truly, there's only one thing left to do, and that is our hemming. So I'm gonna show you how I hem knit fabrics, and then you're gonna be all done with your shirt. Now I've got my shirt inside out on my ironing board, and I wanna look at the bottom where we're gonna put our bottom hem here. So I decided I'm going to do an 1.5" hem on the bottom hem and on the sleeves. Anyway, what I'm doing is I'm just using a ruler to curve the inside of this by an 1.5". I'm going to press this. And then I just want to follow the same distance all the way around. Now when I'm pressing this, I'm just looking to create a crease. You don't have to worry about pinning anything. This is just going to help me, once we get to the machine, figure out how far my hem needs to be. So we pressed this an 1.5" all the way around, and again, we turned it towards the inside of the shirt. And this is just gonna be a single fold hem, not a rolled or a double hem. Now this is ready to be sewn, but I suppose I'll get my sleeves ready just so we can do all of it all at once. It's hard to press sleeves all the way around, so I just did enough to help get me started, and I'll figure it out as I go. All right, now I think we're ready. Now I'm gonna take this off again so that we can get all the way around the arm. Now I'm kind of tucking the back half of fabric underneath the arm so that this will kind of roll around it. And then I'm gonna line up this side seam with the inside of our hem right here. Now we're using the same stretch stitch, and I'm just gonna try to sew about 1/4 inch from the top of this fabric. Now for this part, it's really important that you let the machine draw the fabric in. If you pull it at all, it can pucker and ruffle. So I really want this to lay very naturally. If you're wondering about finishing this raw edge right here, knit fabrics are far less prone to fraying than wovens, so I usually don't even worry about that at all. Anyway, I'm just gonna keep going until we get back to where we started. All right, now we're back to where we started. I'm gonna do a little back stitch here and then cut our thread, and we are done with our bottom hem. The inside looks like this, and the outside should just look pretty flat with a little stitch mark right there. For the sleeves, I just kind of pressed it an 1.5" in right where our bottom seam is there. So I'm just gonna fold that over, my 1.5", and then try to wrap my sleeve around the arm of this machine, just like that. Then I'm just gonna line up the inside of my hem with the presser foot, put the presser foot down, and then just kind of straighten this up. Just in case anyone needed a closer look, just letting the machine pull the fabric in. I'm just guiding it to make sure that the stitch is nice and straight. And then this might be obvious, but trying to make sure that you end your stitch right where you started, like right on top of it, helps just to make it look clean on the outside. All right, now we're just gonna do our last sleeve and we should be all done. All right, so we are all done. This is my new shirt. I did press the hems after we did the stitches, but I think it fits really well, and I can even raise my arms without anyone seeing my belly button, so that's a big win. Hopefully you guys learned something about reading patterns and sewing instructions, and also working with knits and some techniques there. Big thanks to Brother for sending this machine and sponsoring this video in this series. If you have any questions about this project, please let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in our next video.